Now recording. So, one housekeeping item before we launch into today's material. If you take a look at the home page for the course, you may have noticed it already, perhaps not. Lecture recordings may be found on the professor's YouTube channel. So, if for any reason you wish to review the lecture, I am recording it, I am putting it up on the interweb. You may use it however you see fit. Watch it back at 1.5 speed with captions. It has auto-generated captions. No, I don't caption the videos. The robot can caption the videos, thank you very much. Cut it up into meme compilations, whatever you want. So there you go. Any questions before we get started? Okie dokie. So, today we will be talking about HTML. We are going to try to move through this material in such a manner as to not bore the pants off of you, as I know you did an entire course on HTML in the reasonably recent past. So, I'm going to try to focus on new concepts. However, there are some old concepts that we need to review because it's important that everybody has, a consistent basis coming out of that course. There are certain elements that are absolutely imperative to JavaScript programming. So, and there's going to be stuff you've never heard before as well. So, first, let's start off with my expectations for what you guys have already done in your HTML and CSS course. Roughly speaking, if you take the W3 Schools HTML5 and CSS tutorials, I know it's kind of weird because you would think that the red ones were the excluded ones, but in this diagram these are the included topics. So please make sure you are aware of and comfortable with all of the topics given in red here. If any of these are somewhat baffling to you, I highly recommend taking some time this weekend, or at least before our next class, and brushing up on those materials. Again, JavaScript uses HTML as the absolute basis of everything that it does. If you don't have a firm foundation in HTML, that's definitely going to kick you later on in the course, and swiftly. You will receive swift kicks from HTML if you did not pay it sufficient attention. The following bulleted points are a rough list of all of the things you should be familiar with. So, in terms of vocabulary, you should know what elements, empty elements, tags, attributes, properties, values, and selectors are already. You should be very familiar with the HTML elements, paragraphs, links, all 6 of your different headings, divs, spans, images, ordered and unordered lists, tables. Oh, by the way, with table, how do you do a header row in a table? What's the element? What? Yeah. If you want to do a row at the top of the table that's different. Yeah. Also, or possibly T-head or fed, which is, funny. Anyway, forms, you should know form, input, link. You should should also know what style and comment do. Now, did they discourage you in HTML and CSS from using inline style tags?
Yes.
Good. I have a robot that automatically checks for that. So, don't do it. Inline style? No, don't do it. You may have gotten away with it before, but you won't now, because I've got a robot. And by robot, I mean bash script. And by bash script, I mean like 2 lines in a bash script. HTML attributes. You should definitely know href source, ID, and class, as well as all of the specific particular ones for all of the specific particular elements we talked about previously. You should definitely know how to set the inputs type, for example. CSS properties. Color, background color, font size, font weight, font family, padding margin, width, max width, height, border, float clear, display. All that good? Good. And CSS selectors. You should know something about CSS selectors. We will be talking about CSS selectors to some extent a little bit later on when we do the CSS stuff, but you should definitely come into this knowing what they are, how to write them, what they're for, how to use them. Right? So far so good? Good. So, our first topic of discussion today is the HTML CSS division of labor. So, I would like to pull in a physical analogy. Let us imagine, just for the sake of argument, you were framing a house. All right? The task you need to perform is to drive some nails into some lumber. Right? In theory, if you had a heavy enough wrench, you could do it with a wrench. But probably you would want to use a hammer. Right? And not even just any old hammer, but some specific type of hammer made specifically for driving nails, as there are also many different types of hammer. You wouldn't, for example, want to use a great big wrecking, concrete wall wrecking sledgehammer to drive nails into wood, right? There should be something which distinguishes all of you who are going to great time and expense to seek credentials in this field. There should be something differentiating you from the bedroom programmer, the untrained programmer who picks it up, right? Now, I might sneeze. I don't know. Thank you. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Otherwise, it won't. I'm also the president of the Tautology Club, by the way. Somebody asked me why I'm president of the Tautology Club.
Why?
Because I'm the president of the Tautology Club, that's why. Yeah. A tautology is a logical statement that proves itself. So, yeah. Anyway, what was I even talking about? Oh, yeah. So, so there should be something that separates all of you from the untrained programmer, right? You folks are the trained professionals, or you're in the process of becoming the trained professionals, right? A trained professional knows which tool to use on which situation. That's how you work more efficiently than someone who's not trained. because you know how to use the right tool for the right job. So the question then becomes, between HTML and CSS, we know that these are both tools. To what jobs do they apply? So, comment from the audience. What is HTML good for? What are its strengths? At the back, sir.
Organization of the website.
Organization of the website. Yes. I would say so, yes. Yes? That's right. That's where the content of the website lives. Right? The content and the organization of that content. Very good. How about CSS?
Stylization.
Stylization, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the same thing.
Cool. So what do you mean by stylization? That's a little bit of a broad term.
You could take fonts or any kind of content that can have different types of styles and specifies the type of style you want out of a library, essentially.
Sure, sure. Another important one, right, is layout. Right? Now, layout is one where it's kind of the less informed, less skilled operator of these tools. That's where the gray zone is going to be between HTML and CSS, is in layout, right? But let's pull up an example of a web page. Not sure why I'm always interested in picking on the Wikipedia page of the day, but here we go. Who even is this person? Oh, okay, some American. All right. So, within this web page, there are several page regions, right? Can anybody identify a couple of the page regions in this web page for us? Yeah.
So you've got the navigation at the top.
Navigation at the top. Very good. What's another one? Yes.
On the right side, there's like selections for the text being small, standard or large, and like the website.
Very good. This appearance form-looking thing, right? There's a hide button here. I don't know if you can see it all the way back there, but there's a hide button here, so this thing can pop in, pop out. Any other regions that are important in this page?
You've got the main article in the middle.
Yep, main article in the middle. Obvious, but not to be overlooked. And, yes?
I was going to say the contents page, so I think jump either one or the other.
Yes, contents. You could also call this article navigation, right? So you've got website navigation and you've got article navigation, right? So, of these three elements, sort of ignoring the picture for the time being, these things are occurring side by side by side, right? Do they occur side by side by side in the HTML source? That would be silly. Like, what are you going to do? End a line, start a div on the same line, close the div, it's not the way that HTML works. It's a very, very linear way of specifying things, right? Everything is either above or below something. So there's no concept of side by side, right? So, how do these panes arrive at their present positions? Sorry? Yes. Something, something, grid, flexbox, something like that. CSS. CSS is what's controlling this. And you know that this is CSS because watch what happens when we put it in phone mode. You guys know how to engage phone mode in Chrome? Did they show you this? All right. So if we engage phone mode, first of all, you have to reload the page. There you go. But once you have these boxes that were formerly side by side are no longer, right? Because phone widths do not permit side-by-side things most of the time. Rather, you hide those sorts of things in menus, right? CSS. Does this make sense? Any questions? So, it's kind of a universal property of programming languages that you can do anything with any programming language, right? In theory, if I wanted to write a Java program to produce this web page, I could do that, right? It's possible. Is it advisable? Hell no. Right? HTML is a language that was specifically designed for this task. CSS is a language that was specifically designed for its tasks. To the extent that you are using the languages as they were intended, you are doing less work than somebody who doesn't know where these things are supposed to be used. A very good example of this is someone who doesn't use CSS for layout, right? In theory, a person could write their entire website not using CSS for layout. You know, you can manually modify attributes inside of HTML tags to produce many of these effects, right? Between a combination of HTML and JavaScript, you can definitely get there, right? But it will be much more expensive to develop, both in terms of, you know, your time and your patience, right? The code that you produce will not be as maintainable as if you had done it properly, which means that basically any changes that come later are going to be excessively painful to implement. So, okay, you may have heard the term maintenance, software maintenance, and software maintenance costs used, but maybe had not a clear idea of what is actually meant by that term, right? Well, in the modern sort of software environment, maintenance normally means fixing bugs that are found by customers, right? Ordinarily, you know, you would say, I don't want to present any bugs to my customers, right? But even if there are no, like, outright bugs, there are likely to be small feature tweaks, small feature improvements that are requested on an ongoing basis by anybody who uses your software to do anything, really, right? So, all of that stuff takes a developer, right? Bugs must be fixed by a person. The Infernal chatbot is not yet to the point where it will fix all of your bugs for you for free, right? That incurs a running cost. That is the maintenance cost of the software, right? So when we say that software which is designed well initially incurs less running costs in maintenance over time, essentially, in layman's terms, if your code is junk and no one can use it, it takes longer to fix things. Therefore, the software it costs more to fix things, right? Making sense? Good. So, please, please, please respect the HTML, CSS division of labor. Use both of them for what they're good for. This concept applies to JavaScript as well, right? JavaScript is good at some things, but it's not good at everything, right? Use it for what it's good for, and if there's something else that's good at the thing you're trying to do in JavaScript, use that instead. Sometimes you'll have a task that nothing is good at the task, in which case you want to default basically to a general purpose programming language. JavaScript will fit that role as well, right? But, you know, normally, painfully, it's normally fairly painful because JavaScript is a painful language and it hates you. We'll see how JavaScript hates you a little later on today. So, good. Any questions? So, it seems like you folks have been, like, you've been told this already. I will tell it to you again. When an end user views your website, what will the device be most of the time? The device that they're looking at your website with. What will it be? It will be a phone. The overwhelming majority of the time, your website will be viewed on a phone. Tablets are also possible. Desktops are also possible. When you are building your website, what device are you building your website on most of the time? Yes. A computer in the proper sense, with a mouse, with a keyboard, and all of that, you know. So, when you are designing websites, for optimal user experience, you should be thinking phone first, right? This is why the phone compatibility mode in modern browsers like the Chrome is very useful for testing out your website. You should have it in this mode most of the time that you are trying to figure out layout and, you know, when you're playing with your CSS properties, you should have this page open, right? And if you want to be kind, you'll use a phone with a relatively low resolution as well. In the past, people had the approach that I will do one version of the website for phones, I will do another version of the website for desktops, right? People would often give preference to the desktop because that's the thing they're developing the website on, right? It's sort of primary in their minds. This is why, you know, let's say, does anybody remember like how websites were displayed on phones in like 2009, you know, or 2011? I don't know, maybe this is too young a crowd, but like basically all you were really looking at was like the desktop version, and you had to like pull around with scroll bars to like look at different parts of the website, and like all it was just the desktop version crunched onto a phone's screen or a tablet screen. Not an optimal user experience. Gone are the days. Back in those days, you would have to do one version of your website for every different phone resolution, which is kind of an unmanageable problem, which is why people defaulted to something like, the desktop version doesn't look that bad, Here's a hint, guys. It did. So, in response to this problem, we have a new sort of design philosophy in websites called, anybody?
Mobile first.
Not mobile first, to solve the problem of the phone versus the slightly larger phone versus the small tablet versus the large tablet versus the desktop. All of these are different sizes. Yes?
Responsive design.
Responsive design, that's right. So nowadays, we design the website such that you design one website and it alters itself based on the various widths that it might be displayed at. Instead of having a different copy of the website for all of these different display widths, right? This allows us to do things like have the exact same content and not have to worry about, keeping it maintained across multiple copies. And, it's just like unnecessarily duplicating versions is a bad idea most of the time, right? So responsive design is good. We will, a bit later on, be discussing Bootstrap, which is a CSS library that makes responsive design much easier than it was last semester for you. So please look forward to that. But yeah, very good. So for some reason, some people knew about the reset rule and some people didn't, coming out of last semester. So whenever you construct a website, that website will be viewed on a browser. Browsers have particular, aesthetics, right? The people who make browsers want to make browsers as a form of aesthetic experience in and of themselves, aside from the website that's being displayed, right? So, one of the things that browsers will often do is to include CSS rules by default on your web page without your permission. One example, you might have a CSS rule in a website that sets the default font of your web page to the same font that they are using in the browser interface, which makes a certain degree of sense, right? That harmonizes your font across, say, the page and the tab, right? One might consider that to be, okay, sure, fine. The problem, of course, is if you imagine yourself as starting with a blank slate, you are not, right? Your website will look slightly different from browser to browser to browser because the browsers distinguish each other, they distinguish themselves from each other by having slightly different global CSS rules for websites. So, if you want your website to look consistent across all browsers, you insert a CSS reset rule right at the top. This rule overrides any rules that may have previously existed in the browser. Does that make sense? Good. Did they talk about this in HTML, CSS? Yes? Okay, cool. Okay, so there you go. CSS reset rule. Very good. So, I will try to skip over this as quickly as I can. Hopefully everybody in the room knows what the anatomy of an HTML page is. What is this thing at the top?
Language review.
Nope, that's right there. What's this thing that I'm pointing to?
Document type.
Document type. What does this tell the browser?
Certification HTML.
Wrong! It tells you that you are a standards compliant HTML5 document. A little bit tricky. A little bit tricky. So there is actually a big difference between being an HTML5 standards compliant document and just being some old website from the 90s. So this actually controls the rendering mode of the browser. When doc type is missing, the browser enters a compatibility mode, which is called Perks mode. We don't have to get into it to any great degree, just understand that, again, if you're concerned about how your website is actually rendering and wanting to keep that consistent, doc type needs to be in there. Any questions? Okay, so, how about this? What's this? That is a comment. Yes, very good. When you put statements of authorship in things, please put it in a comment. We already talked about, well, somebody mentioned this sets the language of the website. Setting the language is what enables browsers to prompt for auto translating using the correct language, right? So if you haven't set the language, the browser is not going to know how to translate it. The browser, like that plugin in the browser isn't doing some kind of, fancy textual analysis to try to determine what language this is, right? It's not doing that, it's just looking for a tag. All right? It's like, they like to pretend otherwise. It's like, we have detected that this website is in Spanish or something. And it's like, oh, so you read the tag, you detected it, did you? Right. The website told you it was in Spanish is probably more accurate. Browser. So, otherwise, what is the purpose of the HTML tag? To contain your HTML code. Very good. What is the purpose of the head? Yes. It contains information about the actual website. Meta elements give you various things. We also have a title element which sets, what does the title element set?
The name of the browser with the bar at the top.
Yes, the tab name. Yes. Or if there are no tabs, the name of the window in some browsers. So, very good. So, are you folks familiar with the concept of metadata? It's a term that you may have heard before, but never really received a good definition for. It's a very important concept, especially since all of you are computers professionals, or at least aspiring computers professionals. You should know what metadata is. So I will explain the concept of metadata with a joke. You may have seen this one before. Someone who gets the joke, what is an acronym?
Is meta?
Yes, well that is the acronym here. An acronym is a word formed by collecting all of the first letters of all of the words in a group of words. So ISMETA. Right? So metadata is intertextual information. It is not explicitly in the document, it is associated with the document, right? So if we consider the body of the HTML file to be the document itself, the metadata attached to the document, it's never seen by the user, it's not intended for use by the user, it's mostly intended for use by the browser, right? The browser requires some metadata, some additional information about the page other than the mere text of the page, in order to do fancy things like, for example, offer to translate it for you, right? So the language of the page is also a form of metadata. Metadata is also commonly associated with just regular files in your operating system. Your operating system keeps track of a certain amount of metadata about all of its files. Does anybody know how to get at that information?
Right-click property.
That's right. Right-click properties. Metadata includes things like size on disk, size on disk, location. You might consider the file name itself a form of metadata. Certainly the file extension could be considered metadata. Whether it's read-only, whether it's hidden, whether it's executable, all of these are pieces of metadata. Metadata is still very, and timestamps. Timestamps are like the quintessential example of metadata. All of this data is still like very useful data. If it wasn't useful, we wouldn't keep track of it, right? But it's not the explicit content of the file. That's what metadata is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Very good. And, if I may say so, checking metadata is also a step that you can take to verify whether someone's trying to swindle you. For example, let's say that you are contacted by email by a dispossessed prince from another far-flung country, right? All you need to do is send a certain small sum of money, and that person will come back into their inheritance as ruler of that country and send you untold millions of dollars, right? This is the classical Nigerian prince scheme scandal, right? So, if the person sends you, if you receive files, right? Well, first of all, if you're stupid enough to get files off of the email, right, from a scam, another topic for another day, check the metadata. It's like, this hot thing on the dating website, whom I am interested in dating. Let's see that image, what the metadata is on that. Oh, that photo was taken in 2006. Right? Metadata. So, always check the metadata. So, anyway, and the body is where you put the actual like website contents. Any questions? Okay. So, I won't bore you with descriptions of all of those, but this is interesting. Okay, so is this thing broken? Come on. It is, actually. There's a little light switch right here that in theory I could like dim that bank, but like wow. Civilization is falling apart. Gonna have to go back to the back of the room and do it manually. This one's work. There we go. All right. So, this section is on the quote-unquote semantic use of HTML code. All right? Now, it just so happens that I have a PhD. The PhD that I did was in formal methods and compiler theory. I wrote my own compiler for my PhD. That's what I did. It wasn't a very good one, but I did do it. And I did eventually graduate. But when it comes to the construction of programming languages, I am a registered expert. Therefore, I can explain to you the concept of syntax versus semantics because I have actually studied this at a post, I've done this quite a bit in the past. So I'd like to give you as clear an explanation of the difference between syntax and semantics as I can, because these are words that will keep popping up so long as you are trying to write programming code. All right? But I'm very interested in what you folks think the difference is, because I'm interested in your brains. So, and what, how they work. So, what do you guys think that syntax is?
Punctuation formatting.
Punctuation formatting, yeah. Not a bad definition. Anybody else? Yeah?
Spelling.
Yeah, spelling is another one, yeah. Anything else? No? What does it mean when you get a syntax error? I'm sure you've gotten syntax errors in Java already. What's a syntax error?
So you type something wrong and then it's telling you, no, that's not the, if the editor's telling you, no, that's incorrect, I can't run it properly.
Yes, it's telling you that your code is incorrect. But, incorrect how? Right? Because a syntax error is not the same thing as a type error. Right? Yes?
I mean, it causes the program to fail to compile. That's the main difference between semantic and syntax.
Very good. The difference between a syntax and a semantic error, a syntax error causes the program to fail to compile, whereas a semantic error normally shows up at runtime. Now, a semantic error can cause your program to crash, or it could just cause your program to produce the wrong output, right? Semantic errors are what we call bugs, right? A bug, generally speaking, is a semantic error. Now, syntax errors are a subset of all of the errors that will cause a program to fail to compile, right? Depending on your language, type errors will also cause this, right? In Java, a type error will mean the program doesn't compile in the first place, right? If I try to assign a string to an integer, for example. So, the more formal definition of syntax is that it is a grammar, right? So, in the same way that natural languages have grammar, right? By the way, computer scientists, we refer to normal languages as natural languages. That's just the way we refer to it. So, when a person is speaking English, something like, noun-verb agreement on plurality, that is a rule of English grammar, right? He runs, she runs, they ran, right? That's a rule of grammar. Things like all sentences must be, terminated with a period instead of a semicolon, right? That's a rule of grammar in English. So, grammar is a set of rules which govern the correct construction of sentences in a language. Programming languages and natural languages. Does that make sense? So when you have a syntax error, basically what the computer is saying is you have made a grammatical mistake, and as a result of that grammatical mistake, I cannot interpret this program. So, in Java, if you forget a semicolon, it will literally think that you're trying to do two assignment statements, back to back. They are, it'll think it's the same statement. Try to parse it that way. It'll fail. Syntax error. Throws up its hands. Right? Human beings, generally speaking, are a bit better at language processing than computers. We have a certain degree of fuzziness in our understanding of grammar. A person can actually speak with pretty poor grammar and still be mostly understood by a human being, right? Computers are a lot stupider. They have to be told things a lot more specifically. So far, so good? So, semantics then. So, if syntax is the set of rules that tell us how we are allowed to put together the elements of a language, the semantics of the language are the rules for the attachment of meaning to those same symbols. Alright? So, can anybody tell me what the functional unit of meaning in the English language is? When we write a definition, what do we write a definition for? A word. Very good. What is the functional unit of meaning in a programming language? A little bit more complicated, right? What are the equivalent of words in programming languages?
Strings.
Strings or characters, yes. In most languages, strings separated by spaces, right? In most languages, whether the spaces are optional or not, not all, like you can do this without spaces, but normally, you know, anywhere you can put a space validly, that is a separator that indicates what the thing inside, that the thing inside is like a, you know, a language element. We actually have a word for this, it's called a lexeme. Lexemes are the functional units of meaning inside of a language, right? So words in English are lexemes, right? In the English language, individual characters are not, they do not carry semantic meaning, they carry phonetic meaning, right? They're guides to pronunciation. There are, you know, there's a whole category of languages, such as Chinese and Japanese, that apply semantic meaning to individual characters. Necessarily, they have a few more characters than English, right? Depending on, you know, depending on the script you're using and all that. Some are phonetic, some aren't, but, you know, anyway. So, the lexeme maps to a meaning, right? When I have a plus sign inside of a programming language, that maps to some meaning, right? Individual languages make different decisions about what those meanings are. Like, for example, in Java, plus can be used for both integer addition, floating point addition, and string concatenation. But if you take a look at a language like PHP, the plus sign is not used for string concatenation. You use the period instead. So, when we say semantic in a programming language, we are thinking about what things mean rather than how we write them. Right? So if we consider these two examples, one of these is an example of HTML code which has been produced semantically. The other is a piece of HTML code which does not respect HTML semantics. Below, we have both of these options rendered. Well, here, let me pull back just a little bit. There we go. So, as you can see, from an end user standpoint, you might not even be able to tell the difference between the two of these. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say, no meaningful difference might be seen between these two by an end user. Right? They are pretty much the same. However, if we take a look at the HTML code itself, we see that these are very different. So, oh, one thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about screen widths. If I ever see a horizontal scroll bar, I will kick you out of this program. Alright? The very worst thing that you can have on a phone, or frankly anywhere else, is a horizontal scroll bar. I don't ever want to see them. Alright? If you ever have one, it means you have done something deeply suboptimal. Alright? So, no horizontal scroll bars, okay? Okay. I don't actually have the power to kick you out of the program. I was, you know, threatening you for comedic effect. Hopefully I didn't give anybody an anxiety attack. So, on this side, the good side, we have a heading. What do we have on the other side? A paragraph. What are we doing to that paragraph? Yes. What is the purpose of bolding this paragraph? Yes, to try to make it look like a heading, to distinguish it from the paragraph text. If you just used a heading, there would be no need to bold it. Also, it's not a paragraph. Why are you calling it a paragraph? Next, this one right here. This isn't even standards compliant. What's missing?
Paragraph.
Yes, paragraph tags. Opening and closing. As we get into JavaScript, you'll see that this is actually like even worse when we talk about the document object model. But, you know, it'll still render, but it's not been tagged for, according to what it is. Now, what on earth is going on here?
You basically have like 5 images. You have the image, and then the text beside it, a line break, and then you're repeating it, changing just like the text.
Yes. We are inserting bullets by including an image of a bullet. Again, deeply suboptimal. Like, good gracious me. By the way, did they tell you not to use breaks in HTML and CSS? They cautioned against them?
They discouraged it, but they said if you just use it once or twice for something minor, that they'll ignore it.
Well, I mean,
Like as long
Yeah.
as the whole page isn't like line breaks or whatever.
they were being nice. Yeah. So there are only 2 acceptable uses of the break tag. Can anybody, would anybody care to guess what they are? There are legitimate uses of break, right? But there are only 2 of them. Anybody care to guess? Yes?
Just to separate 2 lines?
Well, yes, but in what context? Like you wouldn't want to do it to separate paragraphs. That's what the paragraph tag is for.
No.
You certainly wouldn't want to do it here, although this is also separating lines.
You can do it within a paragraph, even, just like have a break tag to maybe narrow the paragraph a bit more.
To narrow the
I don't know how
paragraph?
to explain it better.
Got to say.
If you want to narrow a paragraph, put it in a
I
div.
know, yeah, with the
Yeah.
word, yeah, but let me think about it.
Anybody else? When should you use a break tag? Only 2 reasons you should use a break tag. What are they? Number 1, to separate elements of a form. Alright? If you're making a form and you want the elements of the form to be on different lines, you use break. Can anybody guess what number 2 is? Poetry. Yes, poetry. That's right. Because with poetry, like paragraphs, roughly speaking, are verses, right? You wouldn't make a new paragraph for every line in a poem. Like, line breaks are appropriate in poetry, so you line break in poetry. But, yes. So, poetry and forms. Nothing else. Unless you're debugging PHP. But then, the breaks are not intended for permanent use. You should delete them when you are finished. So yeah, this is awful. This is a terrible way of doing this, right? So, returning to the concept of division of labor. I know, I am speaking to a room full of people who selected voluntarily to enter a program, or perhaps not voluntarily, I don't know your background. Perhaps some of you have been coerced into this. But either way, you are in a program for computer nerds. It is very likely that I am speaking to a room composed almost exclusively of introverts. Alright? Now, I understand. I was an introvert too once. And then the world changed me. I know that most introverts would rather pull their own toenails out with a set of pliers than work with somebody else on something. But, unfortunately, you are members of this species living on this planet, and eventually you will have to work with someone, even on something technical. You will be at companies, or in the public sector, or wherever you find yourself. Maybe you'll be entrepreneurs, but you will have to work with people eventually. When you do, one of the things that we often do in this business is we break people's jobs up among these languages, right? So you will have the HTML person, you will have the CSS person, you will have the JavaScript person. These might be different people. People might, move between roles, whatever, but in general, it's a good fault line to, if you're going to draw a division, it's a good place to draw one, right? Separate responsibilities. So, I like you. I'm looking out for you. I don't want the world to hate you. Alright? If you code like this, people will like you. If you code like this, people will hate you. This means getting to sit at the lunch table with the rest of the nerds. This one means having to sit at your own table in the cafeteria. Alright? I know that might be a common experience for many of you, but, I joke, all joking aside. Imagine yourself in the role of this, you don't even have to imagine yourself in the role of the HTML person, alright? If you are the CSS person, which of these two would you rather work with? Right? If I am designing CSS, and I say, I want all of my bullets to be green now, here, I don't even have to look at the web page. I don't even have to read the HTML. It's just there. I just write my thing, and I'm done. Here, I actually have to open up an image file and go in with MS Paint and repaint the bullet to be green. Good Lord. And what happens when you want them to flash rainbow colors? Impossible. So, that is much harder to work with in terms of CSS because you just have no idea what strange moon logic went into the design of this, right? But if you are going to use strange moon logic to construct your websites, at least do it consistently. The only thing worse than doing this is to do this and that in the same document. All right? Have I made myself clear? Question?
Yeah, just a question about, really, I guess this example kind of brought up a question. So I remember in our final exam, it brought up a question about how could you make a specific image bullet point. So I guess I'm curious about where you could take an image, say if you wanted the Batman symbol as your bullet point, how would you use that embedded with CSS
There must be a property for it, right?
I would figure.
Allows you to set the image you want to use as a list item marker. Apparently it is list style image.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, there's a thing for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Right there. That was on the exam, eh? A little bit mean. As a person who occasionally gets accused of writing mean at exam, oh, okay, well, I didn't have a stroke, did I? That just blinked out. All right, yeah. As a person who's occasionally accused of writing mean exam questions, I think that one was just a little bit. All right. Basically, when people accuse me of having mean exam questions, normally the reason is that I'm expecting them to know how to compose algorithms. Basically, I'm expecting people to have learned something from previous courses. Like, you should be able to nest loops by third semester. Stuff like that. Right. Like, the only thing that you have going for you as a human being, especially in this world where we now have the infernal chatbot, is that you have the ability to solve problems that have never been solved before, right? It's not easy to do that, but you can, like, you should be able to compose an algorithm from scratch because, like, that is your, like, that's the only thing you have going for you as opposed to, like, you know, all of the generated solutions. It's like, if it doesn't exist in the bank of generated solutions, you can still do something about it, but the chatbot will fail, right? So, anyway. So, like, the actual math skill part of programming has never been more important than it is right now, right? Anyway. So, so let's now switch gears ever so slightly. Let's discuss the document object model, or reverently, the DOM. So, when you are working with JavaScript, like all programming languages, you are operating on data, right? So far in Java, the data you've been operating on has been largely console input, right? In in the server side, when you get there, the data you will be operating on is incoming request packets in order to produce outgoing response packets. Input, process, output, right? In JavaScript, the only, like, the thing you are processing is the HTML document itself. That's it. That is what the purpose of JavaScript is. At least in its iteration inside of a web browser. I'm not going to talk about, like, JavaScript as a server language or anything else. In sort of web classic, I have browser-based JavaScript. This is what JavaScript is for. It modifies a document, right? So, in order to modify a document, you must understand how that document has been organized. So, HTML, which is a sub-language of XML, is organized hierarchically, right? So, when we write an HTML document, we tag things, and we put other tags inside of larger tags, right? And that's the entire structure. It's a big nested organization of elements. In object-oriented terms, we consider these smaller nested elements to be either sub-elements or child elements. If the sub-elements are child elements, these super elements are parent elements. So, in this diagram here, head and body are children of HTML. Does that make sense? Good. I know that you folks have not gotten far enough in your Java class really to touch object-oriented programming. By the way, how far are you guys in Java right now? What was the last thing you guys covered? Loops? Okay. If else? Okay. So you guys are still really at the, yeah. They're really like, the basics of the basics. Yeah. They did for loops with you?
Did a while loop.
A while loop? Okay. For loops are much easier here than in Python. A for loop is just a while loop with a couple of things moved around. That's it. For loops. If you understand a while loop, for loops are easy in languages that are not the accursed snake language. So, later on in the course, we will explore how to create child elements from a parent and remove them using JavaScript in a pure sense. For the time being, we are mostly interested in JavaScript. We're interested in the DOM for the purposes of navigation, right? So there are, and I'm now talking about JavaScript, so you can begin writing things down. There are two very important methods that we use in JavaScript, and one that you will see a lot that frankly is falling out of favor for being the old crusty boomery way of doing it. Alright? So, we have three methods. Oh, by the way, how much data structures did you guys get in intro programming? Did you guys do lists and arrays at all? Yeah? So you've got if I were to say this thing returns an array, you have a rough concept of what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Good. So, document dot query selector document dot query select all. Actually, I think it's query select. There we go. And then document dot get element by ID. All three of these methods do roughly the same thing. They return a reference to some node in this tree, some element of the DOM. The DOM could be considered to be stored at document. So document is your entry point into the DOM. These are search functions. Right? Anybody care to guess what the old one is? one of these things is not like the other? What's the one that I'm trying to actively discourage you from using? Any guesses? The third one, yes! This one. Yes. So, it's still a very common, it's still in common usage, get element by ID, right? So, you remember ID tags, I hope, from HTML. They did those a little bit, right? Yeah. You really will not have seen them shine until we get them into JavaScript, right? The IDs can be used to pull elements from the DOM into JavaScript so that we can work on them in JavaScript. But we can do more than just that, right? Get element by ID presupposes that the element you're trying to target has an ID, right? Not all elements have a declared ID. Maybe you want to pull everything of a particular class rather than an ID. Query select and query select all allow you to throw in a CSS selector, an actual literal CSS selector encoded as a string, and it will pull out anything in the DOM which that selector matches. You can then pull the references into JavaScript, and you're off to the races. Does that make sense? Sort of? We'll get there. Yeah. So the difference between query select and query select all, query select only pulls the first matching instance of the search. Query select all pulls all matching instances of the search. So, for example, when I did the Rickroll last week, I used query select all. That's how I got links to, like, despite the fact that a standard Wikipedia article apparently has like over 2,000 links on the page, I was able to programmatically apply that to all of them using arrays, right? And query select all, as opposed to doing it, 2,000 times with query select, right? So, that is how you pull references to things in the DOM, right? But now, we need to talk just a little bit about what a reference is. Okay, I'll give you a break in about 5-10 minutes, okay? Yeah. Let me finish my rant. So, I want you to imagine, all right, that we have the document object model somewhere in memory, which is true, right? The document object model exists in program memory. So we have our HTML, we have our head, we have our body, and let's imagine, just for the sake of argument, we have an ordered list with 4 elements, right? Inside the body. Ordered list, maybe throw like a heading in there. Ordered list, list element times 5 or 4 or whatever. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So this, we'll call this region document memory. All right? The browser, when it renders, it pulls from document memory. It takes the document memory and renders the web page with it. Whenever it detects that something has changed in document memory, it re-renders the web page. Make sense? You also have JavaScript program memory. Right? So, JavaScript programs can have variables, can have instantiated objects, just like a Java program, right? So let's say, I have a variable x. That variable contains the number 5, right? I have a variable y. That variable contains the string hello. I don't have to type these variables because it's bloody JavaScript. JavaScript hates types. So, the question that these methods solve is, how do I pull document memory into my program memory in order to work with it? The answer is that we create a reference to document memory. All right? Now, I want you all to envision a reference as an octopus with one tentacle. Okay? Exactly one tentacle. So, if I create a reference, we'll call it foo. It is also a piece of memory inside of program memory, but it is also an octopus. An octopus with one tentacle. All right? Now, when we call query select and we say let foo equal query select, and then you select some statement using it, or you select some element using a query selector, the return result of that method is the location of the item, right? The location of the thing we found. So when we assign it to foo, what we are essentially doing, let's say, for example, rather than ... we put something useful in there, like ordered list, right? In that case, our friendly octopus reaches out his tentacle and suction cups this element, right? This variable is touching that element, right? It's a reference. You can get to this element by following the tentacle. Does this make sense? So, this guy now, because he's a sneaky octopus and he has the octopus camouflage abilities, he can now pretend to be that element. Right? So, this element has properties. It has properties such as inner HTML and style and a whole bunch of things beside, but these are two very important ones to start with. Inner HTML is all of the text inside of the tag and includes all of these things, right? Style is basically your CSS properties, which you access in a more object-oriented fashion, right? But this sneaky octopus can say, I am ordered list. Pretend pretend I'm an ordered list, guys. I'm an ordered list down. Even though he's just a reference variable, he pretends to be the thing that he's attached to, right? So, when we want to access the properties of this element of the DOM, all that we need to do is say foo dot style or foo dot inner HTML. Right? We don't have to say ordered list dot style or ordered list dot HTML, and we don't have to do absolute element pathing through the document object model in order to get to that element. We just use the search function, create a reference to the thing, and then pretend that that reference is the thing. It's technically not. It's an octopus in disguise. But it will still work. Does this make sense? Cool. If this is still a little bit fuzzy, this should make more sense as we move forward through the class, as what I have just described to you is like there are a couple of operations that you'll do in JavaScript that you'll do basically every single time you ever need to do anything, and this is one of them. Alright? This is a very, very, very basic standard operation, and you will get lots of practice. Alright? So, but yeah. So, dot syntax though. Have you guys seen dot syntax very much? Python also uses dot syntax. So, all that dot syntax means is that I am going from a parent to a child, right? I am stepping down the hierarchy. So, inner HTML and style are also considered children of the ordered list element, right? Because, inner HTML in particular actually contains these, right? So these are also children of this element. You go from this one to that one using dot syntax. It's like, I start at the parent, I want to step to the child, I say what parent, I say what child, there's a dot in between, right? So dot syntax is also element access, but it also works on methods, right? So, and it's a little bit weird to think of methods this way, I understand, but please think about methods as procedures that we can attach to objects. That's what a method is. That's the difference between a method and a function. A function is just a procedure, hanging out, being cool, all right? A method is a function with allegiances, all right? It's a function that it is attached to a class or an object, specifically, right? So, query select all is a method of the document object, which is this thing, right? So, if ordered list has any methods, and it has a few, but I can't remember any off the top of my head because honestly you don't use them that much, you would also have access to all of ordered list's methods via our octopus named foo. Does that make sense? Okay. Are there any questions about that? Okay. In that case, by the powers vested in me by the College of Mohawk, I hereby declare a 15-minute break. Please be back here at precisely 11:45. Thank you very much. All right, silence please. Thank you. So, I would now like to demonstrate. Good grief. I would like to demonstrate all of this business that we were talking about before. All right? As stated previously, you can execute whatever JavaScript you wish from inside of the JavaScript console on any web page. So, let us pull a reference to some element of the page. We will also bind that to a reference variable octopus. Query selector. So what element should we get then? What do we get for P? So, we are about to dip our toes into the very troubled waters of how JavaScript hates you. Alright? First of all, this might be unclear. It's telling me undefined. Now, that does not mean that it found no reference to a paragraph element in the page. It is not saying that the output results of document.querySelector are undefined. What it is saying is that the let binding operation returned undefined. That is to say, the assignment itself did not have a return result. This is less useful than it might be in terms of information. If you take a look at the variable itself, you will see that it is in fact a paragraph element. It is in fact the first paragraph. There you have it. Including some sub-elements. So now, I can show you the third hello world of JavaScript, which is to actually make some modification of the page. So, foo.innerHTML is equal to, there we go. That's from a class I taught yesterday. Help! I'm trapped in a Wikipedia article. Ta-da! And the modification is made on the page. We reach through the tentacle into document memory, we modify something, and then the changes happen on screen. Does this make sense? So far, so good? We can also modify style this way. We can modify CSS properties. Now, it's a little bit tricky versus CSS properties that you've known so far. When you have done things like, say, border left, right? Previously, you would have written that border hyphen left, all lowercase. Here, a hyphen is removed, and we have an uppercase L. This is a form of capitalization known as camel case because of the humps, right? So, there are a couple of different ways to do casing on variables. Another one is snake case. So, camel case capitalizes every word in the description aside from the first one. Snake case puts underscores between everything. Alright? But it's kind of neither here nor there. So, if here you were to say something like background background color, if I spelled it correctly at least, we get uncaught reference error, color is not defined. It does not believe that this is part of the CSS property name. What does it think that it is? What does it think the hyphen is doing there? It thinks that color should be a variable. So what does it think the hyphen is doing?
It's basically breaking it between the background and.
Well, it's not just doing that. It's actually it's attempting to perform an operation.
Math.
Yeah, it's attempting to perform subtraction. Right? So you can't rely on your CSS hyphens from before. You must use the language in the manner it was intended. Dot background color, and we will set that to the hello world of CSS colors, Alice Blue. Ta-da! We can also modify the color attribute itself. Like so. So basically, every element of the DOM has a style sub-object, a style child, the most stylish of children. The style element has a separate individual child element for every single possible CSS style property. You can pick the one you want, modify it in JavaScript, and this is less efficient than doing it in a CSS file, but still possible, right? Does this make sense? Any questions? A little bit? Is there anything I can clarify? Okay. So, as an in-class exercise, I would like everybody in the room to please open up a web page, doesn't matter which one, pull a reference to a page element, doesn't matter what kind, modify its inner HTML property, and modify one style property. Okay? I shall give you 5 minutes. This is the class participation portion. Try going to console. Try opening console. Isn't it lovely how many mornings they have Canvas produces? Don't need to get me started on that.
This is a flagrant abuse of the no food.
No, it's very aesthetic. I don't want to, you've done lovely work. Possibly in the wrong place. You can change anything. The question is,
Okay, so I'm gonna
where is this thing? So, recent announcements. Oh, cool, all right, yeah, you're doing it. You're doing it. Good job. Right, so, using the JavaScript console, pull out a reference to some page element, modify its inner text, its inner HTML so that it says something else, and then modify one stuff as practice. Yeah. Just make it straight. Yep. My name. Did it work? Untaught type error. It's not a function. Oh. You're assigning it. There you go. Boom. Difference between attributes and methods. How do you think a place like Port Shoreham, Nova Scotia gets its name? Yeah. Maybe it's like a bunch of pig farms in the area, you know? Port Shoreham, as opposed, but that would mean like Shoreham as opposed to like Ham. And maybe there were also a bunch of aquatic pig farms, just sort of off the Bay of Fundy.
Is this room? Living in the water? Birmingham? No.
I know.
It's so goofy. I think my least favorite one is Liverpool. I think this is disgusting. Like bottom.
The accent.
There's one that's really big. Got the
Okay, how many people managed to get that working? How many people are still working on it? Okay. It's not a function. Assign the string to it. Don't use brackets.
I sent it in.
I'm stuck here. I don't know. Restart again.
This is JavaScript. In this case, we're editing both.
Okay.
So, all right. So, some of you may have found that a little bit trickier than you thought it might have been. Let me show you what maybe a pitfall that some of you may have experienced was. So, perhaps you may have entered something like this. Who.inner HTML is equal to the thing I want to print. Well, that looks like that worked, but it doesn't appear on the page, right? Does anybody want to guess what JavaScript has done here? Because this is an error. Yeah?
HTML is fully caps, so with that, or HTML after it isn't all caps, would that cause error?
Yes. We do not have capitalized letters here. So yes, property names are case sensitive, but if you did this in Java, you'd get an error. Where's my error?
It doesn't throw exceptions.
It didn't, yeah, it doesn't throw exceptions at you. This was not an error. I have assigned something to a property which doesn't exist. How did I not get an error?
Is it because it's creating that property for you?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. Hopefully everybody's getting a sort of a sinking feeling in the pit of their stomach, right? Yeah, so if you misspell an attribute, it'll just make a new one with the misspelled name. That is an actual thing it does. This is one of the reasons that JavaScript hates you. All right? If we take a look at JavaScript's properties, you will see that I have both inner HTML with lowercase tml and HTML with uppercase HTML as defined properties of this element. So, one of these is a part of program memory. One of these is a part of document memory. Shh. The one that's the part of document memory updates the appearance of the web page. The one that is not is essentially just a variable which has been attached to the tag. I'm not saying that there's no useful thing you can do with the ability to attach some random variable to a tag. That's a thing that you can find purpose for, right? That's a tool you can use in your tool belt. However, we do end up with the situation where obvious misspellings of property names do not result in expected behavior, which is, a program crash or something like that, right? JavaScript will just try to muddle along anyways. It's like, oh yeah, man, I'm sure that's what you meant. Man, you wanted to make a new variable with that. That's right. I'm sure you know that. I don't have to tell you that. You know what you're doing, right? That's what JavaScript says to you. And JavaScript hates you. So, be aware of that. There are languages that produce lots of errors, and there are languages which produce very few errors. JavaScript is one of the very few errors languages. Much to our, much as we might prefer otherwise. Like, I hope that by the end of this semester, each single one of you, learns to appreciate compiler errors, right? Like, I know that, when you're trying to program and you just want to get the assignment done, and you've got a whole bunch of compiler errors, and it's like, I just want the thing to work. Why do I have to fix all these errors? Are they all meaningful? Do they mean anything? Yes. The compiler errors mean something. They mean your program is junk. And unless you fix your junk program, it won't let you run it. Well, JavaScript is one of these languages that's like, well, I'm sure it's not that bad. I'll try running it anyway. Right? And when it does, you get problems. JavaScript is a problem language. All right? Basically if we want to return to our previous conversation about syntax versus semantics, or, syntax versus semantics, JavaScript is a language which attempts to move the line too much into syntax errors. It's like, nobody likes syntax errors. Let's try to have as few compiler errors as possible. All that you end up doing is expanding the space for semantic errors. Like, that was a semantic error, not a syntax error. It was a decision on the part of the people who designed JavaScript that should be a semantic error and not a syntax error. But that's okay. Pretty much all interpreted languages are like this. So, any questions? Be careful when you type stuff. Okay. Good. So, rolling back to our discussion of the DOM, now that we have an idea of what the DOM is, I would like to return to our previous example here, and let's discuss for just a moment that problematic paragraph. This guy right here. So, when we are accessing the inner HTML or the inner text of elements of this guy, we can be reasonably sure that all of the things in the list are list items, right? If you imagine this whole block as being contained inside of either div or HTML, right? All of this would have one parent, right? Question. To what does this paragraph belong? What element of the DOM? Perhaps it would be useful to draw out the diagram. So, for this one, let's imagine that we have an HTML element that is the parent of everything in there, right? So we've got an HTML element. It contains an H5, it contains a paragraph, and it contains a UL, which contains itself 5 list items. Right? So let's try to do the same thing over here. We have an HTML element. We have a paragraph. Inside of that paragraph, we have a bold, we then must ask ourselves the question, what do we do with that? Right? Question mark? Afterwards, there's a paragraph containing 5 images and 4 break tags. But the question remains, where does this thing fall? Because it kind of falls in between, doesn't it? Guesses?
It's inside the HTML.
That's right. This paragraph belongs to the parent. It's not its own child. It is considered part of the inner text of the parent. So it actually doesn't even have its own DOM element. It is part of the paragraph text. Or it's part of the, it belongs to the HTML tag, right? Which, you know, let's say you wanted to do something with that paragraph in JavaScript. How would you pull out a reference to it?
I don't know if this will work, but like I don't know if you can do it. You can extract the whole HTML, like make a reference just to the HTML code.
Yeah, well, you'd have to get a reference to the HTML node. Yes, absolutely. Which you can do with Query Selector, not an issue. Here's a question. If you wanted to change that paragraph's text, and you grabbed a reference to that HTML node, and then you modified inner HTML, would you modify that paragraph text? Who thinks yes? Who thinks no? You actually would. You would modify the paragraph text, but you would modify more than you were bargaining for. You would also erase all of the other child elements. Right? First paragraph, the second paragraph, all of that is included in the inner HTML of the HTML element, right? Inner HTML is all of the children. So, if you overwrote inner HTML to try to modify that paragraph text, you would end up overwriting not just the paragraph text, but everything inside of the element. This is, once again, deeply suboptimal, right? And then a bad paragraph would then go and add those back in ad hoc, right? Make sense? So this is why we should, this is yet another reason why you should design your HTML semantically so that not only CSS knows what to do with it, but JavaScript knows what to do with it as well. Good. Any questions? I know this has been like a pretty talking heavy one. Don't worry, as the course goes along there will be more in-class examples as I have more JavaScript to do with you guys. Unfortunately, this is just kind of the way this one's going. The class will get more interesting. So, good. Okay. So now we have to talk about forms. And now for something completely different. So, they talked, so you were taught how to construct a form in HTML and CSS, right? Everybody good with that? what they probably didn't show you is how to use them, right? So in particular, they probably didn't dwell very much on get versus post, did they? So HTML is transmitted with HTTPS, right? We must now talk a little bit of networking. We must now talk a little bit how packets are configured, right? This is all very useful and relevant information to the software designer. So, when a client connects to a server, sends a request, that request may have any of a, like there's a field inside of the packet called method, right? Method may be set to a number of different sort of key values. There are actually like over 20 of them, I think. But for now, we're only really concerned about 2 of them, get and post. All right? So get requests and post requests are 2 different forms of HTTPS packet. It doesn't really affect the structure of the packet too much, except in a few specific ways, but overall, get and post requests have different intent behind them. So, not knowing anything about the subject, if I were to quiz you, what do you think a GET request is for? What would you say? What is a GET request for? What do you think? Yes? Getting information. Very good guess, and as it happens, also correct. How about post? Yes?
I think you're posting information to something about.
So posting information. So the term post is kind of interesting, as it has at this point like seeped into internet parlance, right? Like pretty much everybody knows what it means to post something, right? Social media feeds are composed of posts, right? Things which have been posted. So the actual term derives from the snail mail system. There is this old system that goes back several centuries whereby a person would take an instrument, write glyphs on a piece of paper, package that piece of paper, put a thing called a postage stamp, which was an indicator of which was almost a kind of a quasi-currency, put that on, give it to a person, that person would take it to another person indicated on the package, and this was a system by which people transmitted information. You know, in the before times. In the present day, we have electronic methods, but many of our electronic methods are holdovers from the age of post, where you would post a letter. So to post means to send something, right? We are not so much interested in it's not so much a request for information as a provision of information, right? I am providing the server information. That's what the intent behind a post request is. So, let us speak for a moment about packets. So, you guys did intro networking, right? What's a packet?
A piece of data.
Pieces of data, yes. Pieces of data traveling through the network, yes. Packets have different formats, right? HTTPS is a packet format, right? SSH is a packet format, FTP is a packet format, SMTP is a packet format, right? SQL, as it turns out, is a packet format, as well as being the structured query language. right? What does it mean? What is a packet format? A packet format is basically a map of the bits contained in a packet to say these many bits are this many bits is that, right? This field occupies byte 17 through 42, all of that kind of stuff, right? So, under HTTP packet specifications, there is a region of the packet called the header, and a region called, not the footer, the payload. Generally speaking, the payload is the thing you are trying to transmit, the header is how it gets there, right? So, security. We would like our packets to have as much security as possible, right? However, we can't encrypt everything, right? Think about how a packet is transmitted through the network, right? The packet is transmitted by being bounced between routers, switches, computers, servers, all of that networking gobbledygook that we don't really have to worry about because we're not networking students, right? However, the packet, like the client cannot establish a mutual encryption key with every node in the network. That would be ridiculous, right? And it also, like, at that point, when you make the encryption key that public, is it really any good as an encryption key anymore anyways, right? So, the header contains the routing information. It contains all of that information necessary for the packet to reach its destination. It cannot be encrypted, right? It needs to be read by the nodes in the network. The nodes in the network do not share the encryption key that's set up by the TLS handshake, so that region of the packet must be plain text unencrypted. Does that make sense? That being said, the payload certainly is encrypted, right? So, all that being said, let's take a look at an example where we are sending both get parameters, or we're sending both get requests and post requests. So, these are two forms which have been configured to use either get or post. If we, well, let's start with get, just because it's a little easier. So let's say I'm, doing my form things, doing all kinds of stuff. Boop. Last name is that's a password field. Would it be a bad thing if the password ended up in the header? Probably. The header is unencrypted. If the password ends up in the header, everybody on the internet can see our password. This is bad. This is generally considered a bad situation. So, I have shown my cards just a little bit, but when I submit the form, let's take a look. Well, actually, oops. Let me open up the inspector and show you the packet, the network tab. The network tab is where you can view the contents of the packets which are being sent to and from the network. So, if I submit this form, I get this packet, and you can see all of my values appearing here. Now, let's take a look at the header, right? Taking a look at the header. This is the request URL, right? This is the remote resource that the website is requesting. It's not in the payload, it's in the header. I will copy this and pull it into Notepad for increased magnification. So, the way that information of this type is sent to the server is using what are called query parameters. Query parameters. So when you have a question mark which occurs in a URL, that is the beginning character, that is the starting character of query parameters. The query parameter separator is the ampersand character. So, this information is being sent to the server. Separated on ampersands. Now, things are going so far so good. Yes, 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 good, good, good. Oh. Now, there was something about the last name field. What was it about that? What was the problem? Yes? It was supposed to be a password. Looks like our password has been transmitted in plain text in our header, folks. Whoopsie. So, long story short, get versus post are not only for sending or receiving information. In truth, both of them send and receive information, right? Get parameters are not a secure way of sending information. With post parameters, that information is stored in the payload. Change my password. Yes, I think so. So, this is information sent back from the server. Basically, all the server is doing in this case is just echoing back the information that it received. But if you take a look at the header, you can see that our URL does not contain any of the data, nor is it to be found anywhere inside our header. It is in the payload. The payload on the post parameter is the payload on any HTTP packet is encrypted, right? So you can send a password via post, but you cannot send a password via get. Does this make sense? Good. So this kind of also demonstrates how these rules are a little bit fuzzy, right? It's like, what is a login request, right? Is it get or is it post? If it's post, what are you posting? Right? Arguably, a login request is like, please get me an elevated level of privilege on this website, right? Arguably. If you actually use get, not great. Yeah, does this make sense? Does this make sense to everybody? Good. This is called accidental data exposure. Okay. So let's talk for a moment about client-side validation. So, did they hammer data validation into you folks in programming fundamentals? Have you heard the term before? Yeah? Good. Probably by data validation they meant if statements, right? Essentially.
Yeah.
If the data is well formed, then do the thing, otherwise complain that the data is not well formed. So, when we are on a website, one of the useful things that we can do with JavaScript is that we can perform some client-side data validation. Imagine that your website is some kind of e-commerce thing. You require someone's shipping address in order to send them a product, right? You need a phone number, you need a postal code, that type of thing. There are rules for how a postal code is supposed to be formed, right? In Canada, we have 6 characters, and we alternate letters and numeric characters. That's how our postal codes work. I believe in the United States they have 5-character postal codes, and they call them zip codes. I'm not sure why. What about them is zippy? I don't know. They are postal codes essentially, but you know, zip is probably an acronym or something. But because this data, which the client is supposed to enter, has a particular format, we can check that format before that data gets sent to the server, right? We can write a little JavaScript routine that makes sure when the user enters a postal code, that is a valid postal code, right? Another example of this, which is actually one of my favorite examples of something you can do with JavaScript on a form, which, you know, it says something about my life that I have a favorite thing you can do with JavaScript on a form, but this is one of mine. You know, when you're filling out a web form and it's a phone number and it's like inserting the hyphens as you type, right? That's a form of client-side data validation. That is happening in JavaScript, my friends. And that's a thing that, you know, constitutes like a kind of a nice UI thing. Although people are, I think, probably as often frustrated by it as they understand, you know, it's like, oh, I don't have to type the hyphen. Okay, I won't then, you know. If you're going to do that, you should definitely also prevent them from typing the hyphens. But anyway, so client-side validation is good. It helps reduce the number of invalid requests that the server will receive. That costs you less money over time, right? Because you have to pay for network traffic, right? So, the question, though, is that sufficient? Right? Is that all of the validation that you need? And the answer is absolutely not. All right? On the server must always, at least duplicate the validation checks that are happening on the client. In fact, a good server will go quite a bit further than the validation checks being done on the client. it doesn't matter how well you write your JavaScript, someone can turn it off, right? Even worse, someone can modify your JavaScript. As soon as your code leaves the server and enters someone else's computer, that person has the full ability to modify your code in whatever manner they choose, right? The sort of shallow end of the pool on this is gets past your client-side validation and enters things into your server that shouldn't be there. Invalid postal addresses, etc., right? The deep end of this pool is actual cyber attacks, right? You got a question?
Are you saying that's not the case for any other codes? As soon as it enters like certain computers, some codes are not able to be useful?
No, as long as a file is on your computer, it can be modified, right?
Yeah.
This is like the inherent problem with it's a particular problem with the web. You see a lot less of this problem, like, say you're downloading and installing Minecraft, right? If you modify the base code of Minecraft, most of the time you're just going to break it, right? And even if you're doing something useful, you know, Minecraft has like the mod scene. If you want to mod Minecraft, there's like an accepted way of doing that without modifying the base code of your Minecraft installation, right? Like basically there's no real reason to, right? Whereas on the web, you always have that, you know, you have this, you know, hard, rocky exterior of internet security. But always, if you manage to crack the egg open, right, you've got the soft, delicious yolk of people's data that you can steal and make money from, right? So really there's no real reason, aside from perhaps personal interest, to mess around with the programs that are sort of exclusively for you on your own computer, right? You can still modify them, right? For closed source software, this is technically illegal, but you can do it anyway, right? But with the internet and anything that connects to a database, people want the data. Hackers want the data. They are going to try to break your website, right? They are going to try to do anything they can do to cyber attack you, right? Oh my goodness. Do I need to bring up the city of Hamilton hack? Right? Yeah. So I don't know, it seems like that's like slowly coming back online. I noticed that in public libraries the computers are now functional again, which seems to indicate that like they are gradually rebuilding the whole system. But perhaps if you're sort of new to the city and you haven't like heard of this, basically for about a year and a half, I think, maybe 2 years even, the city of Hamilton was subject to a pretty intense cyber attack where they lost everything. It was a ransomware attack, and they lost everything. All city databases, all city records, they lost everything, all of it. Everything from vaccination records to public community centers to the computers in libraries, everything was gone. Everything was down. And like, I think the hackers themselves like didn't realize how effective they'd been, because like basically as the news feed was rolling out, the amount of money that they were requesting in ransom just kept going up. It was like, oh, that's down too? Oh, well, I guess you're going to have to pay a little extra then. So the city of Hamilton decided not to pay the ransom, and therefore has been in the process over the last year and a half of taking literally every computer in the city, disconnecting it from a network, throwing it into a big hole, and buying a new computer and making sure it doesn't connect to any of the other computers until all of the computers are in a hole with large rocks and boulders over top of it, doused in gasoline and set on fire. The city of Hamilton cyber attack is like, it's kind of almost like a historically bad cyber attack. I haven't heard of one that was ever that bad, where they actually like lost all city cyber infrastructure. All of it! They lost everything! Medical records, gone. Ridiculous. I hope you kept receipts of your COVID vaccinations, right? But yeah, everything gone. It was amazing. And and basically, I was asking the networking guys, like, surely this must have been something exceptional for this to happen. And one of the networking guys, whose opinion I trust to a great extent, said, it could have been a bad email. Could have been a phishing link in an email. So, obviously there would also have been structural problems, right? But essentially, anyone with a browser, or even without a browser, anybody with a computer on a network can send requests to your server. The requests your server is serving do not need to originate in the web page that you have written. They can just be requests, sending data, seeing if that data gets accepted. The server must have its own security. Validation on the client is nice, but the server must have its own completely independent security system. Does that make sense? Okay. Good. Let's see where we are then. So a thing that I say in my server-side class very frequently is never trust the client. Never, never, never trust the client. Never trust the client. Never, ever. Are you finished? That's probably my wife, actually. Never, ever, ever trust the client, ever for any reason. Does anybody have any questions relating to this? Unrelated to this? Does anybody have any philosophical questions? Not that's going to hold up lunch, am I right? All right, get out of here. Go, have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir.